Welcome back to the channel. This game features Nigel Short against Dmitry Gurevich, an American grandmaster who also defected from the Soviet Union in the early 80s. The game was played at Hastings Premier, round 12, 1983 to 84. The game started as a Sicilian defence. And once again, the Keres attack against the Scheveningen variation. Nigel played Bishop G2 in an earlier round 5 against Suba, but opts for the aggressive rook to G1 in this game. Here Nigel advances the pawn. He could have taken the pawn and got quite a nice position after the following variation. Where he has an isolated H pawn, but a very good position. He decided to push forward with the G pawn kicking the knight. Here Nigel opts to take the knight. Black can recapture the bishop, which he does, or take in the centre with either knight takes d4 or queen takes d4. I think queen takes d4 is a bit dodgy, but certainly knight takes d4 would be playable. Nigel accepts the pawn, but black does get a good counterplay. Striking in the centre, trying to undermine white's centre. Nigel calmly develops his bishop. He could have taken the E pawn with his queen, but black gets quite good activity and play for his pieces, and the positioning would be quite equal with the H4 pawn dropping at some point. So although he's 2 pawns up, it would be 1 pawn, and white is much better developed. Then he calmly just develops the bishop. Black tries to stop white queenside castling. Nigel now accepts the pawn. And this is a good move. Well, possibly queen takes g7. Is playable as well, but this would lead to quite an equal position. So he opts to play g6, trying to undermine the f pawn. Here Gurevich decides to take the e pawn. I think putting one of the rooks on e8 would have been a much better option, putting pressure indirectly against the queen and the white king, which are on the same line. And here white seems to have a nice position. He's got a clear pawn ahead, and his queen's quite central. but obviously the f2 pawn's attacked. For some reason, Nigel decides not to defend it and just play g takes f7, and I'm not entirely sure why he's done that. It seems that queen f4 would have been quite straightforward, just to defend the f pawn. And here's probably the most critical point of the game. Gurevich decides to play rook takes d2, which is actually losing. As white can take the rook and get out of the checkmate attack. If Gurevich had played bishop to g4 in this position, which looks a bit strange because the rook can just take the bishop. But the idea is now that rook takes d2 will work, as if you take the rook back with the king, obviously queen e3 is checkmate, and if you take back with the rook, then you allow queen to e3 in mating. The best in this example here, sorry. So if the queen goes to there, then you play queen to f1 check, king to f2, queen to g1 check, king to h3, queen to h1 check. The queen has to intercept. Rook takes here, rook takes, queen to f3 check, queen to g3 and queen to e3 is mate. So it's quite clever that this bishop g4 move would have worked, and obviously the king can't, the rook can't take. I mean, he can potentially play king to f1 in this position, but it's still good for black after queen to a6, king to g2, bishop to d4 check, rook takes d2, bishop takes queen, rook takes, and black is still slightly better. But unfortunately, Gurevich messed up the move order and played rook takes d2. And the idea is now that the rook on g1 will defend the first rank, so all of the mate threats after rook takes d2 would no longer be applicable. So now a bishop to g4, but obviously, unfortunately, it now doesn't work. So Nigel just calmly steps out of the check. And here he decides to play queen to e8 check, which kind of simplifies the position, but there's a much stronger move in queen takes g7, which forks the rook and the bishop and would have led to a one position after the following variation, which is kind of all forced. The king runs to the queen side, and white can eventually queen the f pawn and get the rook, and the game would be over. But he plays queen to e8 check, which allows black some chances after he moves the king. And another check, and the king escapes to a8, a6. Although potentially this is a poor move in the fact that he may have been able to block with queen to c7, but I'm not so sure that's any better after white's next move, which is queen to a3. Now white must intercept with black must intercept with queen to a5 in this position, and after this sort of variation, he's still worse, but he can fight on. Whereas the move he plays, queen to b7, leads to a lost position after white queens the f pawn and gets the rook. And the king can still start running. Taking a pawn with check, blocking. And now Nigel can just simply trade the queens. And step out of the attack. The rook steps out of the attack, guarding the h pawn against any bishop f2s. He's now a clear exchange up, and then a totally one position. Here, Gurevich decided to resign. Oh, maybe not. Sorry, beg your pardon. He played on for a few moves. But it's all pretty hopeless. And the c pawn's now going to drop. And a check. The rook to g4 actually forces the trade of the bishops, otherwise he loses the bishop due to one of the bishops due to a skewer, so he must play bishop to f2. And white can swap it off with the knight and have a totally one position. Here Gurevich decides to resign. A good win for Nigel, who staged a bit of a comeback towards the end of the tournament. He actually finished on 6 out of 13 after a short draw in the last round. So not a great tournament for him, but as I said, managed to get a bit of respectability back in the last couple of rounds with good wins against strong GMs. That concludes the Hastings Premier games, and I'll be back with some more games from 1984. Please like and subscribe.